She said I'd never be anything until I was the one interviewing her for the job. The same girl who once made me feel small was suddenly in front of me, waiting for my decision. This is the story of how humiliation turned into power, and how the past came crashing into the present. Because sometimes the people who try hardest to break you are the ones who end up needing you most. And to understand how it all began, we need to go back to the cruel years when her words first cut deep. I can still remember the smell of those high school hallways bleach from the janitor's mop, chalk dust hanging in the air, the faint odor of cheap pizza wafting from the cafeteria. For some people, that smell brings back warm memories, pep rallies, Friday night football games, first crushes. For me, it brings back something else entirely: fear, dread. The sharp taste of humiliation I swallowed nearly every single day, and at the center of it all was her. She wasn't just popular, she was untouchable, the kind of girl who owned every room she walked into. Her hair was perfect, her clothes were always on trend, and her smile could flip between charming and cruel in a heartbeat. Teachers adored her confidence. Classmates followed her like she was royalty, and she knew exactly how much power she had. That power she loved to use on me. I was her favorite target. I didn't come from money. My parents worked hard just to keep the lights on. I wore hand-me-down clothes that never quite fit right, and my sneakers had scuffed soles long before I could get a new pair. I carried my lunch from home sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, leftovers packed in mismatched containers. She noticed all of it. She made sure everyone noticed. "Nice shoes," she'd say loudly in the hallway, eyes sweeping down at the worn-out sneakers I was embarrassed to wear. Did the thrift store have a sale? Her friends would burst into laughter. I tried to pretend I didn't hear. I tried to keep walking. But the laughter stuck like gum to the bottom of my shoe. It followed me everywhere. And it wasn't just the little digs. It was the big, public humiliations, too. I'll never forget that day in the cafeteria. I had just gotten back a math test 100%, the result of nights spent hunched over my desk, pencil marks smudged across my fingers. It was one of the few moments I felt proud of myself. I sat down at a corner table, tray rattling as I set it down, thinking maybe I had something worth holding on to. Then I heard her voice. "Look." "At her," she said, pointing directly at me with that mocking smile. "She thinks being smart is going to make her somebody. Newsflash, you'll never be anything. Nobody cares about nobodies." The words weren't yelled. They didn't need to be. She said them like they were fact. Cold. Certain. And the cafeteria roared with laughter. I laughed too. Not because I thought it was funny, but because laughing along was safer than letting them see me break. My cheeks burned, and I stared down at the tray in front of me. Appetite gone, pride shattered. I wanted to disappear into the cracks of that linoleum floor. That wasn't the only time. Far from it. Every group project became an opportunity for her to dismiss me. "Every class presentation," she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. "Try hard." Every time I raised my hand, she rolled her eyes, smirking so her friends would laugh. It was death by 1,000 cuts, and each cut left a scar. But what hurt the most wasn't what she said in front of others. It was what her words did when I was alone. I lay awake most nights replaying her voice in my head. "You'll never be anything." It became a chant, a curse. It was louder than the praise from teachers, louder than encouragement from friends. Her words drowned out everything else, echoing in the quiet when the house was asleep, and the only sound was my own heartbeat. And here's the twisted part. The more she tried to crush me, the more something small and stubborn inside me started to grow. A fire. Not a roaring blazeno. It was quiet, almost invisible. But it was there. I started writing goals in a notebook, scribbled lists in the margins of my homework. Graduate with honors. Get into college. Build a life nobody can laugh at. I poured myself into my studies like they were armor. I couldn't control the cruelty at school, but I could control my grades, my dreams, my future. Every insult she threw at me became another reason to try harder. Still, I'd be lying if I said it didn't break me sometimes. There were nights when I buried my face in my pillow so nobody would hear me cry. Days when I begged my mom to let me stay home, sick of facing the ridicule. There were moments I almost believed her that maybe I was nothing. Maybe I never would be anything. But deep down, I clung to one thought. Someday, I would prove her wrong. Not with fists, not with words, but with success she couldn't deny. Looking back, I realize she thought she was destroying me. She thought she was putting me in my place, but what she didn't know was that every cruel word was a brick in the foundation I was quietly building. She was fueling the very fire that would one day burn bright enough to outshine her. Because while she was busy laughing in those hallways, certain she had already won, I was silently preparing for a future she couldn't imagine. And yet, the road to that future wasn't easy. Before I could ever sit across from her in that interview room, I had to stumble through years of rejection, heartbreak, and moments when I almost gave up on myself completely. Because proving her wrong, that was going to take everything I had. When I finally left high school behind, I thought I was leaving her behind too. I thought graduation would be the end of her voice, the end of the constant taunting, the end of that heavy label she had glued to me. Nothing. But the truth is, people like her don't just disappear when you toss your cap in the air. They linger in your mind like ghosts, whispering in the quiet moments when you're most vulnerable. Even though she wasn't standing in the same room anymore, I still heard her. Every time I stumbled, every time I failed, it was her voice I heard first. You'll never be anything. College was supposed to be my fresh start, a chance to reinvent myself, a chance to step into a world where nobody knew me as the shy kid from high school, where her cruel words couldn't follow me down the hallways. But life has a way of reminding you that you don't just shed the past, you carry it with you. And I carried her with me into every classroom, every exam, every late-night study session where my eyelids felt too heavy to stay open. My reality wasn't like the movies where kids leave for college and magically find freedom and adventure. My reality was juggling a full course load while working nights at a diner that smelled like grease and burnt coffee. I'd stand on my aching feet for hours, serving plates of food to strangers who barely looked at me, smiling even when my body screamed for rest. I'd stumble back to my dorm in the middle of the night, clothes soaked with the smell of fried onions, and collapse into bed, knowing I'd have to wake up in just a few hours for class. And in those quiet, exhausted moments, when the room was dark and the campus was asleep, that's when she came back. Her voice wasn't gone. It was alive, louder than the hum of my alarm clock, sharper than the ache in my back. You'll never be anything. It didn't matter that I was working harder than almost everyone around me. It didn't matter that I was clawing for a future with everything I had. All I could hear was her, mocking, certain, unrelenting. I tried to push past it. I threw myself into my studies with a desperation that bordered on obsession. If others studied for 2 hours, I studied for 4. If they gave up after one rejection, I sent out 10 more applications. I wasn't just chasing success, I was running from her voice. I wanted so badly to bury it under achievements that she could never take away. But the truth was, the more I tried to silence her, the louder she seemed to grow. Rejection became a familiar companion. I applied for scholarships, internships, and programs that I thought could change my path. Most of the time, the answer was no. The emails always looked the same. We regret to inform you. And every time those words appeared on my screen, I didn't just feel the sting of rejection, I heard her. I heard her laugh. I heard her whisper, "See, I told you. You'll never be anything. You'll never forget one night when I failed a major exam." It was the kind of test that determined your entire grade for the semester, and I had poured weeks into preparing for it. When I saw the grade scrawled in red ink across the paper, my stomach dropped. I walked out of the library, the winter air biting my skin, and I sat on a bench until my hands went numb from the cold. Tears rolled down my cheeks, and in my mind, she was sitting right next to me, smirking, telling me I had proven her right. In that moment, I felt like she had won, even though she wasn't even there. But as much as those words crushed me, they also pushed me. It's strange, isn't it? How the very thing that hurts you most can also be the thing that keeps you going. Every time I wanted to quit, I thought about her. I thought about how she would love to see me fail, and that thought lit something in me a fire that wouldn't let me give up. So I kept going. I clawed my way through every semester. I took extra shifts at the diner, saved every dollar, skipped every party, and lived like someone who couldn't afford to waste a single moment. I didn't have the luxury of coasting like others did. I was building a future out of scraps, and I couldn't stop, because stopping meant proving her right. There were small victories along the way, and they mattered more than I can explain. A professor who pulled me aside after class to tell me my essay was the best he'd read in years. A manager at the diner who quietly slipped me an envelope with a little bonus because he said he admired my work ethic. A classmate who told me they wanted me in their study group because I always came prepared. They were tiny sparks in a very dark tunnel, but those sparks kept me walking forward. They reminded me that maybe I wasn't the nothing she claimed I was. Still, the weight never left. It was always there, pressing on my chest, sitting on my shoulders. I carried her words like a stone in my pocket. Some days it dragged me down so low I could barely lift my head. Other days I gripped it tighter, using it as a reminder of why I was still fighting. Either way, I never set it down. Years passed, and slowly, painfully, I started to climb. My resume grew stronger, my confidence grew steadier, and opportunities that once felt impossible began to open. It wasn't easy, it was never easy, but I could feel myself rising. Inch by inch, rejection by rejection, I was building a life she said I'd never have. And yet, no matter how far I climbed, I couldn't shake her ghost. She was always there, in the back of my mind, daring me to fall, daring me to quit. And though I hated it, I also needed it. Because as long as her voice was there, I had a reason to keep going. But life has a way of bringing old battles back in unexpected ways. Just when I thought I had finally escaped her shadow, just when I thought she was nothing more than a memory, she reappeared. Time is a trickster. It makes you believe the past is behind you, that the wounds you once carried have healed, just because you can no longer see the scars. I had convinced myself that I was free from her shadow. Years had gone by since high school, and in that time, I had built something steady, something respectable. I wasn't wealthy, I wasn't living in luxury, but I had climbed further than I ever thought I would when I was that kid, hiding in the corner of the cafeteria. I had a stable career, a small apartment I could call my own, and the peace that comes from paying your own bills without anyone else's help. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. For the first time, I felt like I was standing on my own 2 feet. I told myself I had buried her words, left them in the dusty yearbooks and forgotten classrooms of my past. But ghosts don't stay buried, not when they're carved into your bones. It happened on an ordinary night. I was scrolling through my phone, half asleep, when her face lit up the screen. At first, I thought it was a mistake, some kind of glitch, maybe someone with the same name. But no, it was her. Older now, polished, styled, but undeniably her. That same smile, too wide, too certain. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I was 16 again, clutching a lunch tray while laughter rang in my ears. Her social media was a highlight reel of the life she wanted the world to see. Vacations in tropical places, expensive dinners plated like works of art, designer handbags, perfect lighting in every photo. Each post screamed success, and as I scrolled, the old ache returned. That familiar voice inside me whispered, "Look at her. She made it. And you're still nothing." I hated that it got to me. I hated that after all these years, she could still crawl inside my head without even trying. But there I was, lying in the dark, phone in hand, wondering if maybe she had been right all along. The envy was sharp, but beneath it was something fiercer. Anger. Anger at her for planting those words in me. Anger at myself for still letting them matter. I turned off my phone that night, tossed it onto the dresser, and stared at the ceiling with my fists clenched. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't that scared kid anymore. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't voiceless. I had been building something all this time, quietly, slowly, stubbornly, and maybe it wasn't glamorous. Maybe it didn't glitter on a screen, but it was real. And unlike her curated posts, my life couldn't be filtered or faked. So I used that anger. I let it fuel me. The very next morning, I threw myself into my work like never before. I stopped thinking about just surviving and started thinking about excelling. I raised my hand for the tough projects, the ones everyone else avoided. I stayed late not because I had to, but because I wanted to prove to myself I could. I learned new skills, asked better questions, pushed myself until even my bosses took notice. I wasn't just working to earn a paycheck anymore. I was working to build a legacy, to carve out proof that I was more than the words she once tried to brand me with. Years passed like this. Slowly, the cracks in my self-doubt began to close. I started to rise not in leaps, but in steady, determined steps. I earned promotions, gained responsibilities, and before long, people were looking to me for guidance, for leadership. I wasn't the lowest voice in the room anymore. I had a seat at the table. And every time I walked into a meeting, every time I spoke and people actually listened, I thought of her. I thought of the girl who once told me I'd never be anything, and how wrong she had been. But life has a way of circling back, of testing whether you've really outgrown your past or if it still has the power to shatter you. I was sitting at my desk one morning, sifting through resumes for an open position when I saw it. Her name, right there on the page, as plain as day. My breath hitched, my heart thudding so loud I swore the whole office could hear it. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, convinced I was imagining things. But I wasn't. It was her. Her sum, her credentials, her history, all neatly typed up and waiting for my review. For a long moment, the paper felt heavy in my hands. My mind raced. Memories flooded back the cafeteria, the smirks, the whispers. You'll never be anything. Those words rose up from the page as if she had written them there herself. And now, here she was, seeking a job that would put her future in my hands. I can't explain the swirl of emotions that hit me all at once. Shock, disbelief, something dangerously close to satisfaction. A part of me wanted to laugh, to call it poetic justice. The same girl who once decided I wasn't worth anything was now the one hoping I would see worth in her. But under the satisfaction, there was also unease. A knot in my stomach that whispered, "Are you really ready for this? Are you ready to face her, not as the scared kid you once were, but as the person you become?" Because here was the truth. I had spent years trying to silence her voice, trying to build a life strong enough to drown her out. And now the universe had decided to put us face to face again. She would walk into my office, sit across from me, and for the first time, I would be the one with the power. She had once declared I'd never be anything. But soon she would see just how wrong she was. And as much as I told myself I was ready, nothing, absolutely nothing, could prepare me for the moment our eyes finally met again. The morning of the interview felt like a weight pressing against my chest. Outside, the sky was a dull gray, and clouds stretched tight like they knew something was coming. The office looked the same as it always did, papers stacked neatly on my desk. The faint hum of the air conditioner, the low chatter of phones ringing in the background, but nothing felt ordinary to me. My hands smoothed the edges of the R-sums in front of me over and over, as though straightening them could steady my nerves. When the receptionist's voice crackled over the intercom, "Your next interview is," Haremy heart jumped so sharply I almost winced. My throat went dry. For a second, I considered asking someone else on the panel to take the lead. But no, this was my moment. If life had dragged us both back into the same room, then I had to face her. I had to face me. The door opened, and just like that, time collapsed. She walked in as if the years between then and now had folded into nothing. She looked older. Yes, time leaves its fingerprints on all of us, but she still carried herself with that familiar aura of confidence. Her hair was styled perfectly, her makeup was subtle but intentional, and her clothes were chosen to project success. A sleek blazer, a pair of heels that clicked against the floor with every step, a portfolio tucked under her arm. She had dressed for the part. But there was something new in her walk, something I hadn't seen before. A tiny hesitation, a faint stiffness, as though she wasn't as sure of her place as she used to be. And then her eyes found mine. For a split second, I saw her freeze. Her lips parted slightly as recognition sank in. She knew exactly who I was. That flash of surprise was quickly smothered beneath a polite smile, but I had already seen it, the flicker of discomfort, the tiny fracture in her polished fod. "Please have a seat," I said. My voice was steady, professional, almost cold. I gestured toward the chair across from my desk, the chair where she would sit not as my tormentor, not as my judge, but as a candidate. She sat down, smoothing her skirt, crossing her legs with a practiced grace. Her hands rested on the edge of her portfolio, but I could see her fingers tapping ever so slightly. Nervous energy. A far cry from the effortless dominance she once wielded in the halls of our high school. I glanced down at her R-sum, even though I had already memorized it. On paper, she was polished years of experience, references, skills listed neatly like trophies. But all I could see were echoes of the past, the cafeteria laughter, the sting of whispered insults, the look on her face when she had told me I'd never be anything. "So," I began, my tone measured, "tell me a little about yourself." She cleared her throat, sat up straighter, and launched into the type of answer I had expected. She talked about her work history, her strengths, her achievements. She tried to project confidence, but her voice carried an edge too smooth, too rehearsed, as if she were clinging to her lines the way a drowning person clings to driftwood. And every so often her eyes darted toward me, searching for approval, maybe searching for a crack in my expression. As she spoke, I couldn't stop the flood of memories. I was back in the cafeteria, clutching my tray while she humiliated me. I was back in class, hearing her laughter ring out as she whispered "loser" to her friends. I was back in my room at night, crying quietly into my pillow so my parents wouldn't hear. And now, here she was, sitting in front of me, hoping that I would believe she was enough. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "What would you say is your greatest strength?" I asked the same question I asked every candidate, but to her it clearly landed differently. She hesitated, only for a heartbeat, but I saw it. Then she launched into her answer, her ability to work under pressure, her dedication to results, her adaptability. Her voice was smooth, but her hands betrayed her fingers tapping faster now, her knuckles whitening as she clutched the edge of her portfolio. "And your greatest weakness?" I asked, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her uncomfortable. She shifted in her chair. I suppose I can be a bit of a perfectionist," she said finally, forcing a small laugh. "I tend to hold myself to high standards, which sometimes makes me harder on myself than I should be." It was the kind of safe, practiced answer people give when they don't want to reveal anything real. But I wasn't looking for rehearsed lines. I was watching her squirm, watching her try to hold on to the confidence she once wore like armor. And I realized then just how far the balance had shifted. Inside, a battle raged. Part of me wanted to throw her words back at her to say, "Funny, because you once told me I'd never be anything. And look who's sitting where now." I wanted to see her flinch the way she once made me flinch. I wanted her to feel, even for a second, the sting I had carried for years. But another part of me hesitated. Would that make me any different from her? Would humiliating her now heal the scars she left behind, or would it just drag me back into the pettiness she thrived on? The silence between us grew heavier, and for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel: pity. Because beneath her polished answers and forced smile, I saw cracks. I saw someone who wasn't nearly as sure of herself as she used to be. Someone who was trying too hard to impress, who maybe needed this job more than she wanted to admit. She was no longer the queen bee of high school. She was just another candidate, sitting across from me, waiting for my decision. But that didn't make the moment any less powerful. Because in that room, with her eyes flicking nervously toward mine, I finally understood something important. She wasn't the one with the power anymore. I was. And though I didn't know what decision I would make yet, whether I would hire her, reject her, or simply let her twist in the uncertainty, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just an interview. This was justice. This was a balance. This was the past and the present colliding in a single room. And the question hanging in the air was no longer whether she was good enough for the job. It was what kind of person I wanted to be when faced with the chance to finally hold her future in my hands. The air in the room felt heavy, thicker than it had any right to be. The hum of the office beyond the glass walls faded into something distant, almost unreal. I could see people moving around at their desks, phones ringing, keyboards tapping. But in this small bubble of space, there were only two of us. Me, sitting in the chair I had earned with years of sweat, sacrifice, and stubborn refusal to give up. And her, the girl whose voice had once defined my every insecurity, now sitting across from me, her future balanced on my decision. I studied her closely. At first glance, she was polished, professional, the image of someone who had prepared carefully for this moment. Her hair was neatly styled, her blazer pressed, her portfolio balanced neatly in her lap. But as the silence stretched, the cracks began to show. The way her fingers tapped lightly against the folder. The way her eyes darted toward me and then away, unable to rest in one place too long. The way her smile flickered, like it was glued on but slowly losing its grip. "So," I said, leaning back slightly in my chair, "why do you want this position?" It was a standard question, one that usually drew out the same rehearsed answers, but with her, the weight behind it was different. I wasn't just asking about the job. I was asking why she had walked back into my life, why she thought she deserved to sit in front of me after everything, why she thought I would forget. She cleared her throat and leaned forward just enough to look engaged. "I think my experience aligns well with the role," she said, her tone practiced, professional. "I've developed strong organizational skills. I work well under pressure, and I know how to lead a team toward results. I believe I could bring real value to this company." Her words were smooth, but too smooth, like lines she had rehearsed in the mirror until they lost their soul. I let her finish, jotting down a note I didn't need to write, then looked up again. "And what sets you apart from the other candidates?" I asked. This time, her smile wavered just slightly before she answered. "I'm resilient," she said. "I adapt quickly when things change, and I don't let challenges stop me. Resilient." The word landed in the air like a challenge. My mind flashed back to the cafeteria, the laughter, the whispered insults that became chains around my neck. I was the one who had carried resilience like a shield. I was the one who had dragged myself forward through failure after failure, rejection after rejection, holding on to nothing but grit. She had no idea what real resilience was. I let the silence hang after her answer. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. She shifted in her chair, smoothed her blazer, tried to smile again. I saw the nervous flicker in her eyes, the faint recognition that this wasn't going the way she expected. Finally, she spoke again, her voice softer. "I know we know each other," she said carefully, cautiously. "From school. I wasn't sure if you'd remember." Her words hit the air like a crack of thunder. She had acknowledged it. The past, the connection, the truth we were both carrying silently until now. My grip on my pen tightened, my chest heavy with 1,000 memories that surged forward all at once. "I remember," I said simply. My voice was calm, almost too calm. But those two words carried the weight of every insult, every laugh, every tear I had swallowed in silence all those years ago. And when I said them, I saw her flinch. Just slightly, but enough. She swallowed, her smile faltering. "High school feels like a lifetime ago," she added quickly, almost defensively. People aren't always kind at that age. We do things we regret." Her eyes lowered for a moment before flicking back up to mine. It wasn't quite an apology, more like a statement she hoped I'd accept as one. And maybe, for most people, it would have been enough. But not for me. Not after years of her words echoing inside me like a curse I could never escape. I leaned forward slightly, folding my hands on the desk. Yes, I said, my voice steady but sharp. People can be cruel. Words can stick a lot longer than we realize. Her lips pressed, together. She knew exactly what I meant. The silence stretched again, heavy, tense, almost suffocating. I could see her fighting to keep her composure, to maintain the image of professionalism, but I could also see the guilt flickering just beneath her mask. I've grown since then, she said finally, her voice low. I'm not the same person I was back in school. For the first time, I believed her. Or at least, I believed that she wanted to believe it. But the problem was, I wasn't the same person either. I wasn't the kid she once made small. I wasn't the quiet nobody she laughed at in front of her friends. I had climbed out of that shadow. And now, I was the one sitting behind the desk, holding the power she once used against me. In that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a mirror reflecting who we both used to be and who we had become. I had a choice. I could crush her the way she once crushed me. I could reject her, dismiss her, remind her of every cruel word she had ever thrown at me. Or I could rise above it, prove to both of us that I had outgrown the version of myself she tried so hard to keep trapped. And as I studied her face, the same face that once sneered at me in crowded hallways, now looking at me with the faintest shadow of regret, I realized that whichever choice I made, one truth was already clear. The girl who said it'd never be anything was now sitting face to face with the proof of how wrong she had been. And the story was only just beginning. She sat across from me, posture straight, chin slightly lifted, as though clinging to the last threads of the confidence she once wore like armor. Her answers came smoothly at first, measured, professional, carefully rehearsed. She spoke about her experience, about her ability to adapt, about her supposed leadership qualities. On paper, it was everything a hiring manager might want to hear. But I wasn't just any hiring manager, and this wasn't just any interview. Every word she spoke carried echoes of the past, and each polished sentence only made the memories louder. I remembered her laughter in the cafeteria. I remembered the sting of her voice when she leaned across the table to sneer, "You'll never be anything." I remembered the way her friends looked at me, as if her words had turned me invisible, erased my worth in their eyes. And now here she was, trying to charm me, trying to convince me she was worthy of this opportunity, as though history could be smoothed over with a well-rehearsed smile. As she talked, I caught myself gripping the pen in my hand so tightly it left an imprint in my fingers. Part of me wanted to interrupt her mid-sentence, to throw her words back at her like knives. I imagined myself leaning forward and saying, "Do you remember what you told me back then? Do you remember how you laughed at me? Well, here we are, and I'm the one holding the cards now." The temptation was sharp, almost intoxicating. This was the moment, wasn't it? The moment to get even. But another part of me resisted, because deep down I knew the truth. If I lashed out, if I stooped to her level, I wouldn't be proving anything. I wouldn't be winning. I would simply be standing in the same shadows she once dragged me into. And hadn't I spent years clawing my way out of those shadows? She shifted slightly in her chair, her words tumbling out faster now, as though she could sense the silence stretching between us. "I've always been a strong communicator," she said, her smile tightening. "I know how to motivate people. how to bring out the best in a team. I don't back down from challenges. I rise to them. Rise to them. I almost laughed at the irony. She had been my greatest challenge once, the mountain I had been forced to climb just to prove I could survive. And now she was sitting in front of me, claiming resilience, claiming strength, as though she had been forged by the same fires that nearly consumed me. I leaned back, studying her. For a moment, I said nothing. I let the silence do the work. Her fingers began to tap again, faint but constant, betraying the nerves she was so desperate to hide. She avoided my gaze, then forced herself to meet it again, her smile cracking at the edges. Inside me, the battle raged. The pain of the past clashed with the power of the present. Every insult she had ever thrown at me pressed against my chest, demanding release, begging me to retaliate. But something deeper, quieter, steadier pulled me in another direction. The real victory wasn't in breaking her down. The real victory was in proving that she no longer had the power to break me. So I steadied my voice, calm and professional. "You talk about resilience," I said, keeping my tone even. "Can you tell me about a time when you faced a real challenge, something that tested you?" Her mouth opened, then closed again. For the first time since the interview began, she hesitated. Her polished mask slipped just slightly, and I saw something raw flicker in her eyes. She inhaled, exhaled, and then tried to answer. But her voice wasn't as smooth this time. It carried a tremor. "There have been times," she said slowly, "when things didn't go the way I planned. Times when I lost opportunities, when I had to start over. But I kept moving forward. I didn't give up." I nodded, jotting something down, though what I wrote didn't matter. What mattered was that I had seen the crack in her armor. She wasn't invincible. She wasn't untouchable. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need to crush her. She was already carrying her own weight, already haunted by her own failures. And in that moment, I understood. True revenge wasn't about tearing her down. True revenge was about standing tall in the very place she once swore it'd never reach. It was about showing her, without a single cruel word, that I had already won. But just as I began to feel that clarity settle inside me, she said the words I never expected, words that would shift everything in ways I couldn't have imagined. The words slipped from her lips like they had been dragged out of her by force. "I need this job." For a second, I almost didn't believe I'd heard her right. This was her, the girl who once stood tall in every hallway, the girl who commanded attention with a snap of her fingers, the girl who had told me with cruel certainty that I would never be anything. And yet, here she was, shoulders tense, voice trembling, the arrogance stripped away until all that remained was desperation. Her eyes flicked up to mine, searching, pleading, before falling back to the desk as though she couldn't bear the weight of my gaze. The silence between us was thick, pressing in from all sides. I didn't rush to fill it. I wanted her to sit with her words, to feel their gravity, to hear them echo in the space where once, years ago, she had filled the air with laughter at my expense. Finally, she spoke again, her voice quickening, tumbling forward like a dam breaking. "Things haven't gone the way I thought they would," she admitted, her tone rawer now, stripped of rehearsed confidence. "I thought I had it all figured out, but life has a way of humbling you. Jobs I thought would last didn't. Opportunities I counted on slipped away. I've made choices I regret, burned bridges I shouldn't have." She swallowed hard, her throat bobbing, her hands gripping her portfolio so tightly her knuckles turned white. I stayed quiet, letting her speak. I used to think I was unstoppable, she continued, her voice cracking. I thought I'd always land on my feet, that I'd always have another chance waiting around the corner. But it doesn't work like that. Not forever. Her breath hitched, her mask slipping further with every word. This role, it's more than just a job for me. It's a chance to start again, to prove I can be more than the mistakes I've made. Her words hung in the air, fragile but sharp. I felt a rush of memories flood back, her laughter ringing out in the cafeteria, the sting of humiliation that clung to me for years. The quiet tears I cried alone in my room while her words, "You'll never be anything," echoed in my head like a curse. And now, the same voice was breaking in front of me, pleading for a chance, for mercy, for something she had once denied me. "I know we didn't get along back then," she said suddenly, her eyes darting to mine, her tone almost apologetic, though she didn't use the word. "I wasn't kind. I said things I shouldn't have. I was young and stupid, and I thought it made me strong. But it didn't. It just made me cruel." Her shoulders sagged, her voice softer now, almost a whisper. "I'm not that person anymore. At least, I'm trying not to be." I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in front of me, my expression calm. But inside, the storm raged. Part of me wanted to laugh, to throw her words back at her with the same venom she had once spat at me. I wanted to say, "Now you know how it feels to need, to beg, to be small." Another part of Ms. Mahler, quieter felt, a flicker of something else. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. Recognition that time changes people, and maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as invincible as I once thought. Her eyes glistened just slightly as she spoke again, and though she blinked quickly to hide it, I caught the shimmer. "Please," she said, the word cracking as it left her mouth. "I can't afford to lose this. I need someone to believe in me. I need a chance." The girl who once told me I'd never be anything was now begging me for something she had once denied me. A chance. I leaned back in my chair, studying her, my mind caught between the echoes of the past and the reality of the present. Every insult she had ever thrown at me pressed against my chest like a weight, urging me to reject her, to let her feel what I had felt. But the other voice inside me, the one that had carried me through years of struggle, whispered something else. It asked me what kind of person I wanted to be now that the power was mine. And, as she sat there, shoulders slumped, eyes glassy, pride shattered, I realized something profound. I had already won. But what I chose to do with that victory, that was the real test. The silence between us stretched on, thick and unyielding, like a rope pulled to its breaking point. She sat there with her hands clasped tight over her portfolio, knuckles pale, shoulders hunched ever so slightly. The woman who once towered over me with arrogance now seemed impossibly small, like a shadow of herself. Her words, "I need this job," still echoed in my ears, clashing violently with the memory of her voice years ago, laughing as she told me I would never be anything. I shifted in my chair, feeling the weight of the moment press down on me. It was strange, almost surreal to sit across from her now. All those years I had dreamed of this, dreamed of the day I would stand taller than her, dreamed of the moment she would see me and realize she was wrong. I had replayed it in my head like a scene from a movie, imagining every line I would throw back at her, every ounce of pain I would make her feel in return. And yet, here I was, and the script in my mind didn't seem to fit anymore. Part of me still burned for revenge. That younger version of myself, the one who cried quietly into a pillow while her words replayed like a cruel chant, wanted to slam my fist on the desk and say it back to her. "You'll never be anything." That part of me wanted to watch her face crumble the way mine had, wanted to see her leave this room carrying the weight of shame she had once so easily handed to me. But another part of me, the part that had survived, the part that had carried me through rejection after rejection, the part that had fought to build this career brick by brick, whispered something else. That true victory wasn't found in cruelty. That I didn't need to humiliate her to prove her wrong. I had already done that by sitting here in this chair, by wearing the authority she once swore I would never have. Still, I wrestled with it. The anger wasn't gone. It pulsed deep inside me, raw and restless. Every insult she had ever hurled still lived inside me, and now I had the chance to release it all at once. But if I did, would I really be free? Or would I still be chained to the same cruelty that once held me down? I leaned back in my chair, watching her closely. She shifted under my gaze, her fingers twitching slightly against the folder, her eyes darting away and then back, desperate for a clue, a sign of which way this was going to go. For a fleeting second, I almost pitied her. Almost. "I want to be clear," I said finally, my voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "I remember everything, every word you ever said, every time you laughed, every time you told me I'd never be anything." Her lips parted, her chest rising with a sharp breath. Shame flickered across her face, quick but real. "And yet," I continued, leaning forward now, my eyes locking onto hers, "look at where we are. I'm the one sitting here. I am the one making the decision. You can't erase what you did to me, but you were wrong. Dead wrong." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed, her voice trembling when she spoke. "I know," she whispered. "I was cruel. I can't take it back. I can't change what I did. But I've changed. Life has taught me things. Hard things. I don't expect forgiveness, not from you. But I am asking for a chance. To prove I can be different. To prove I can be better." Her words were clumsy, awkward, stripped of the polish she had tried to wear earlier. For once, they felt real. And that scared me more than her arrogance ever had. Inside, the war raged on. Do I take the chance to cut her down the way she cut me? Do I deny her? Make her carry the same rejection she once dealt so easily? Or do I rise above it, not for her, but for me, for the person I have become? I tapped my pen once against the desk, the sound loud in the heavy silence, then set it down deliberately. I took a breath, steadying myself, feeling the decision settle in my chest. Because one thing was already certain. Whatever choice I made, I had already won. She said I'd never be anything. And here she was, sitting across from me, desperate for a chance that only I could give. The decision was mine. When the interview ended, the room felt like it had swallowed every breath we'd taken. The silence was thick, clinging to my skin as though it wanted to stay with me long after she left. She gathered her things with hands that trembled ever so slightly, though she tried to disguise it by smoothing the edges of her portfolio. I noticed the way her eyes darted down to the floor instead of holding mine. Once upon a time, she had no problem staring me down, cornering me in hallways with her smirk sharp as a blade. But now, she couldn't even meet my gaze without faltering. As she rose from her chair, I could almost see the layers peeling off her layer by layer, the armor of arrogance she once wore so easily. She tried to stand tall, tried to collect herself, but the confidence she had carried in high school, the power she had once used to shrink me into silence, was gone. What stood in front of me wasn't the untouchable bully I remembered. It was a woman stripped bare by the weight of her own choices, her pride swallowed by desperation. She hesitated at the door, glancing back at me with a look that almost seemed to beg for something: acknowledgement, forgiveness, or maybe even mercy. I gave her none. Not because I wanted to be cruel, but because she needed to feel what I had felt all those years ago. The sting of being left uncertain, the ache of silence louder than any insult. She slipped out quietly, her footsteps fading into the hum of the office, leaving me alone with a flood of emotions I hadn't expected to feel. And then it began, the whispers. Word has a way of traveling in an office, bouncing from one person to the next, twisting itself into a story that everyone wants a piece of. At first, it was subtle. A co-worker lingering a second too long at my desk, a raised eyebrow when the candidate's name was mentioned, a hushed laugh in the break room that trailed off when I walked in. But soon, the story spread faster than wildfire. People were talking about the irony, about the reversal, about the poetic justice of it all. The same girl who once made me feel like I was nothing had sat across from me, asking me for a chance. I heard pieces of conversations drifting through the hallways. Can you believe it? After everything, after all those years, she was the one interviewing her. It's almost too perfect, like something out of a movie. The staff exchanged knowing looks when I walked by, their smiles carrying a mix of admiration and disbelief. I didn't feed the rumor, but I didn't stop it either. Let them talk. Let them marvel at the irony. Later, when I passed her in the lobby, she saw me before I saw her. Our eyes met for the briefest of moments, and in that flicker of time, I saw something I had never seen in her before. Not confidence, not superiority, not the smug grin she once wore like a crown. What I saw was humility, raw, unfiltered humility. Her head dropped almost instantly, her gaze sliding away as though the floor was suddenly the most fascinating thing in the world. She didn't speak. She didn't sneer. She didn't even try to force a smile. She simply gathered her bag, clutched it tightly against her chest, and walked out with her steps careful, almost timid. And in that silence, I heard something louder than all, her laughter from the past. Regret. But here's the truth. The biggest shift wasn't in her. It was in me. Because as I walked back to my office, surrounded by the whispers and the irony and the unspoken congratulations, I realized something I had never fully understood until that moment. My success was never about her. It had never been about her. For years, I had carried her words like chains around my neck. I thought proving her wrong would be the moment that set me free. I thought standing above her, holding power over her, would finally silence the echoes of her voice that haunted me for so long. I believed that her downfall would be my triumph. But as I watched her leave with her pride in pieces, I felt no rush of victory, no wave of satisfaction. What I felt was something deeper, something quieter, something stronger. I felt free, because success isn't about revenge. It isn't about proving someone else wrong. Success is about proving yourself right. It's about all the nights you spend alone at a desk, working while everyone else is sleeping. It's about holding on to belief when the world is telling you to let go. It's about failing, stumbling, breaking, and still finding the strength to get back up. I realized I had been measuring myself against her shadow for far too long. She had been the ghost haunting every step of my journey, the voice whispering in my ear that I'd never be enough. But now, seeing her as she truly was, human, flawed, vulnerable. I realized she no longer had any power over me. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need her downfall. I didn't need her at all. That was the true victory. Not in watching her squirm, not in hearing her beg, not in letting the whispers ripple through the company. The victory was in knowing that I had built a life, a career, and a self-worth that existed far beyond the reach of her cruelty. She had once told me it'd never be anything. And for years, I thought the only way to silence that voice was to prove her wrong. But standing there in my office, feeling the weight of the moment lift from my shoulders, I realized something life-changing. I didn't need to prove her wrong anymore. I had already proven myself right, and that's when I finally understood what true victory meant. I slept lightly the night before the decision, waking to the pale blue of early morning with my jaw clenched and my hands curled into fists against the sheets. The city outside was still, the streetlights blinking like patient metronomes, and in that, quiet. I heard everything, every word she ever threw at me, every breath I took to swallow them, every step I'd climbed to get here. I watched the ceiling while the sky lightened, and somewhere between dawn and daylight, the answer took shape, not as a burst of triumph, but as a calm, steady certainty. I would choose the person I had fought to become. I would not let her drag me back into the past. I would not speak the curse she once put on me. My victory would be bigger than that. By the time I reached the office, the building was only half awake. The elevator hummed, the lobby smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, and the glass doors to our floor eased open with a gentle sigh. I set my bag down, sat at my desk, and read the offer letter one last time. No shortcuts, no favors, no cruelty, a clear role, measurable goals, a 90-day probation that would demand everything I expect from anyone I sign my name to. I read each line the way I once read the margins of my notebooks in high school, looking for strength hidden between the words. It was there. Not in punishing her, but in proving I no longer needed to. My finger hovered over her number. I remembered the cafeteria's roar, the red heat in my cheeks, the way my voice shrank to survive. I remembered long nights alone with nothing but a desk lamp and stubborn hope. I remembered carrying her sentence like a stone in my pocket, heavy enough to bruise, too heavy to throw away. Then I pressed call. She answered on the second ring, breath catching like she'd been holding it all morning. "Hello?" she said, soft, careful, as if a loud word might shatter something fragile between us. For a heartbeat, I heard all the endings I could write: vengeful, righteous, petty. I let them pass. I chose mine. "This is me," I said, my voice even. "I've reviewed your interview and references. I'm prepared to make you an offer." Silence bloomed on the line, wide-eyed and unbelieving. When she finally spoke, the practiced smoothness from the interview was gone. What came through was unguarded. "You're offering me the job?" "I'm offering you a chance," I said. 90-day probation, clear targets, weekly check-ins. It won't be easy. It won't be symbolic. It'll be work. If you meet the standard, you stay. If you don't, you don't. This isn't mercy. It's a runway. What you do with it is on you." She inhaled sharply, and for the first time I heard the faintest tremor of the girl she used to be. Only now there was no crowd behind her, no echo chamber, no throne. Just a person at the edge of a choice. "Thank you," she whispered, and then again, steadier, "Thank you. I won't waste it." "We'll see," I said, and ended the call. I didn't feel the sugar high of revenge or the crash that follows it. I felt something cleaner, like air after rain. The offer letter left my outbox with a soft whoosh. and I sat back and watched the cursor blink, the simple, ordinary heartbeat of a life I'd built out of grit instead of applause. There was no cheering crowd for this kind of victory. Good. I didn't need one. Her first day arrived with a sky the color of slate and a steady spill of light across my desk. I arrived early, as I always do. Habit from years of being the first one in and the last one out. The office filled gradually. The smell of coffee, the rumble of elevators, the low tide of greetings and chair wheels. When she stepped through the glass doors, the room did not gasp. No music swelled. She was just another new hire holding a badge she'd have to earn the right to keep. But I noticed the smallness in her shoulders, the careful way she walked, the way her eyes took in the floor as though the carpet might shift beneath her. She reached my office and paused, knocking lightly on the door I didn't have to open for anyone in high school, because there were no doors then, only corridors and corners and a cafeteria with no exits. "Good morning," she said, voice even but quiet. "Come in," I answered. She stepped inside and stopped in front of my desk. Her gaze flicked to the nameplate, and I watched the recognition land. Not the recognition of my face, she'd done that already, but the sharp, unavoidable recognition of position, of place, of power rearranged. I didn't revel in it. I simply let it be true. I walked her through the expectations. Timelines, stakeholders, deliverables. The calendar invites were already sent. The project brief loaded in the shared drive. The first checkpoint scheduled for 10 days out. I spoke as I would to any hire. I handed her the same map I hand anyone, with the same cliffs clearly labeled, the same bridges she would have to cross herself. When I finished, the room held a soft, clean quiet. She nodded. Understood. "Questions?" I asked. A beat passed. Her mouth opened slightly, closed, then opened again, as if she were sifting through 1,000 words and deciding whether any belonged in this room. At last, she chose the smallest. "No." I stood, extending my hand across the desk that once would have been a barrier I wasn't allowed to touch. She reached for it, and I felt the slightest tremble before her grip steadied. This, I realized, was the closure the movies never get right. No dramatic music. No tearful apologies scripted to land like confetti. Just two hands meeting in a place one of them was never supposed to reach. "Welcome," I said. She held my eyes for a moment and, in a voice so sincere it startled me, answered, "Thank you." Something in her face softened, something unarmored. She released my hand, straightened, and added, not as an act, not as a performance, but as acknowledgement of where we now stood, "I won't let you down." "You'll let yourself succeed," I corrected gently. That's the point. Her first week was quiet. She stayed late. She asked better questions by Thursday than she had on Monday. She missed one detail and owned it without flinching. I gave feedback the way it was given to me when I was still trying to prove to the world I deserved to be in the room, direct, specific, respectful. She took notes. She adjusted. On Friday, she sent a recap before I could ask for it. The timestamps neat, the action items crisp. Not a transformation, not redemption in a bow work. The kind nobody claps for. The kind that stacks up until it looks like change from far away. People in the office kept waiting for the spectacle that rumor had promised. The whispered legend of our old roles begged for an explosion, a public comeuppance, a whisper-turned scream to prove the circle had closed with a memorable snap. All they got were calendars, deliverables, reviews. I let them be disappointed. I wasn't there for their entertainment. I was there to live the life I had built, not perform it. On the second week's check-in, She arrived 2 minutes early and sat with her hands folded, not guarding herself ready. We walked through the milestones. She had cleared more than I expected, stumbled where I anticipated, and steadied faster than rumor would allow. When I paused, she took a breath, and for the first time since that day in the interview room, she spoke without reaching for armor. "I owe you an apology," she said, not rushing. "Not because I think it will change anything for you, it won't, but because I need to say it, out loud, to the person I was trying to erase. I was cruel. I chose easy power over actual worth. You were already someone then, I just didn't know how to see it." I studied her face, the younger ghost, and the current truth layered in the same features. I thought of the long corridor between those, two versions of us, the tile floors, the coffee-stained textbooks, the diner aprons, the rejection emails, the early trains, the late nights, the ceilings I mistook for sky until I found a way through them. I thought of all the times I had learned that forgiveness, like success, is something you sometimes grant yourself first. "I don't need it," I said, because I didn't. "But I'm glad you said it. Now, keep doing the work." Relief crossed her face, not dramatic. Not a dam breaking, just a measured exhale. "Yes," she said, then caught herself, then smiled at the correction she chose for herself. "Yes, I will." She left the room taller than she'd entered, and I sat for a while with the quiet that followed. There is a specific kind of peace you only feel when you refuse to become the worst thing that happened to you. It doesn't announce itself. It sits beside you like a companion who has walked the whole way and finally rests when you do. I let it rest. Weeks turned into months the way they do when you are busy living the very life someone once told you was impossible. She hit her targets. She missed one and recovered without excuse. She learned. She stayed. Some days she was only adequate. Some days she surprised me. Most days she was simply a person doing the job. Which is to say, she was like the rest of us, fallible, improving, unfinished. I signed her off probation with a note that was neither lenient nor severe. Meets expectations. Track to exceed. The cursor blinked. I clicked send. The ordinary felt extraordinary because it was mine. People sometimes ask me, in lowered voices like they're asking for gossip, whether I ever threw those words back at her, whether I ever said the sentence she gave me, whether I ever took the chance to cut the old wound into a neat, satisfying scar. I tell them the truth. No, I didn't need to. The echo faded the moment I spoke from a life louder than it. The chapter closed when I chose how to end it, not with a shout, but with a signature. On a Tuesday that looked like any other, she paused at my doorway on her way out, hesitated like she was choosing who she wanted to be in the next sentence, and said simply, "Good night." "Good night," I answered. She nodded, then, almost as if she were offering the universe a small, honest proof that circles do close if you keep walking, added one more word that landed without spectacle, without sting, without any of the weight it would have carried in the hands of the girl she used to be. Boss. I didn't smile because of what it meant for her. I smiled because of what it meant for me. The title didn't make me what I had become. The work did. The years did. The stubborn belief did. But hearing it from the mouth that once tried to erase me felt like the universe folding its map, setting the compass down and saying, "You're here." That night, as I stepped into the evening and the city opened its throat to the lights, I thought of the cafeteria's roar and my small shaking hands around a plastic tray. I thought of the bench outside the library on the winter night I failed the exam and heard her laughter in my head. I thought of the Arai Sum in my hand, the phone call, the handshake over a desk with my name on it. I thought of all the versions of me who had walked this far together, scared, stubborn, exhausted, relentless. And I thanked them for not abandoning me when a stranger's sentence tried to stand in for my future. She once said I'd never be anything. And then, one ordinary Tuesday, she proved how wrong she had been without realizing it at all. She said I'd never be anything, until she sat across from my desk, waiting for my decision, and called me boss.